Hello and welcome to another session of Mindful Data Mine. In today's session, we will be discussing about macros in SAS. Whenever we want to automate anything in SAS, we use macros. So without wasting any further time, let's start with the practicals. So to create a macro, we use percent macro followed by macro name. Let's assume mm1, and in the end we use percent %mend. Okay, and when we want to call the macro, we simply write percent %mm1. That's the macro name, this name. Okay, so this is the general syntax of creating a macro. In case we want, we can also put amend here. Like after amend, we can put the macro name. So this will simply tells that okay, we are ending this particular macro. If we do not write this, then also it is fine. But from a user perspective, if it's a long macro, then and we have multiple macros in a code, then this could actually help a user in understanding, okay, this particular macro has been ended. Okay, now now what I'll do is first I'll create a new data set, okay, using SAS help dot choose and run it. We will see what results we will get from it. Okay, so it says there are 7 columns and 395 rows. Now, what if we want to run this code using macro? For that, we simply need to write our the syntax macro mm1. Okay, and inside this, we just need to put our code. Okay, so this is the data step. In case if we want to put a proc step, we can also put the proc step here. Okay, now I'll just change the data set name to B, and I'll just run this particular code which I have highlighted. Now when I'll run this, you see in the log it says nothing. My macro has been compiled but it has not run. It has not generated any result. It will be only generated when we call this mm1. Okay, now I've selected mm1 and run it. Now I'm getting the same result in B dataset, that is 7 columns and 395 rows. So this is the general syntax of creating a macro. Now, apart from this, in case if we want to pass parameters into a macro, we can always do that. For that, we use a term called parameterized macro. Okay, now how we'll write the parameterized macro? It would be percent macro mm2, and in the bracket we pass the parameter, let's say a and b. Okay, now I'll write data and a, that is ampersand a, set and b, that is ampersand b, and run. Okay, and finally I'll use amend here, and to call the macro we need to use mm2. Now let's assume I want to create a new data set named as c. So I'll use a equals to c, and I need to pass it from SAS help.choose. Then I'll use b equals to SAS help.choose. Now what happens at the backend is these two items, a equals to c and b equals to sashelp.choose, will be passed to this macro. And when we use ampersand a, so what happens is this becomes a macro variable. Okay, now when we use an a, that is ampersand a, at the backend SAS understand this is a macro variable and tries to resolve it. So when ampersand a will be resolved, SAS will get a value as c. Similarly, when ampersand b is resolved, SAS will get a value as sashelp.choose. Now this is a typical example of how we can use a macro. So let's assume that I want to make four different data sets. Okay, what I can do is I can do it like this, and maybe from four different data sets again, maybe sashelp.cars, and then maybe I have something, let's say ships, or the fourth one is, let's say, train. Okay, then we just need to use this and run it. We need not to write a macro again and again, because what we haven't passed any hard-coded item here. When I say item, I'm typically meant to say a dataset name. Okay, and we can always update it at a particular location. So we need not to write this entire code again and again. That's one use case for macros in SAS. Okay, now let's get back to the example. Okay, so this is a parameterized macro in which we have a parameter A and B. Now when I run this, again, nothing has been generated in the log and no results or output has been generated in the window. But as soon as I run this, we get the result. 7 columns, 395 rows. Similarly, let's assume I want to create a dataset D using sashelp.cars. Then I just need to run this. I'm running the highlighted one. Okay, and a new dataset will be created using sashelp.cars dataset. Here we have 15 columns and 428 rows. Now in parameterized macros, we can either have a keyword or a positional macro. Okay, so this one is a positional macro. All right, to make it keyword, what we do is we simply use equals to. Okay, so this one is my keyword macro and this is my positional macro. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll simply write %mm3 and try to call it. Okay, so first I'll compile this. Now, if you see we are getting an error, it says all positional parameter must precede keyword parameters. So what does this mean? See, this is a positional parameter. That means it has a specific position. So we cannot change the position. But in case of a keyword parameter, we can pass it anywhere. So A equals to will remain A equals to whether you put it at first position or last position or anywhere else. Okay. But in case of B, it has to be at a particular position. That's why what SAS suggests is to keep all the positional parameters first, followed by the keyword parameters. Because keyword parameters can be interchanged. When I say interchange, if I have C equals to D equals to, okay, and here I can simply write it like this. B equals to, let's say, my data set is E this time. Then I can use D equals to something something. Then A equals to, let's say this, and C equals to. If you see, D is our last parameter, but I'm passing it on the second position. Similarly, A is my second parameter, I'm passing it on third position, and C is my third parameter, and I'm passing it as it on the fourth position. So this is how the positions can be interchanged in case of a keyword parameter, but this cannot be changed in case of a positional parameter. That's why we are getting that issue or error. Okay, so please keep in mind in case if we try to use keyword parameters first followed by the positional parameter, then we will get this error. Okay, now to have both in one place, what we need to do is we simply need to do it like this. Okay, in this example, what I've done is I have kept the positional parameter first, followed by the keyword parameters. Okay, let's assume my macro is M4 this time, and here I'll use percent %mm4. Here I'll pass the dataset name as D, sorry, E, because D we have already created here using sashelp.cars. And my data set from which I want to get the data is sashelp.cars, let's say. Okay, again, in case if I want to run both of them together, we can run it. Okay, my data set will be generated with 15 columns and 428 rows. The data set name is E. So this is how we can create a macro in SAS. Now in the upcoming session, we will talk about how we can create different macro variables. When I talk about macro variables, I'm talking about this, how we can create macro variables. So in SAS, there is only one way to create macro. When I say one way, I'm talking about percent macro, because inside it, either it can be parameterized or non-parameterized, and rest all are the ways to create macro variable. Okay, so in the upcoming session, we will be talking about macro variables, how we can create it using different ways. Kindly let me know in comment section if you have any queries, doubt related to how we can create macros. I'll see you in the next session. Thank you.